Who closed the $50 million deal, the CEO asked. No one in the glass conference room answered at first. Then her assistant looked down and said quietly, "The single dad you fired yesterday." 24 hours earlier, Jack Mercer had walked out of the building carrying his entire 6-year career in a cardboard box. No farewell, no second chance. At home, his 9-year-old daughter still believed her father had a job. But while everyone upstairs slept, the man they had dismissed as an ordinary IT worker did something none of their executives could do. He saved the deal. And what the CEO discovered next would expose a buried secret, a forgotten past, and a choice that could change 3 lives forever. Stay with this story because sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the one holding everything together. If you're watching, like the video and tell me in the comments what city or state you're watching from. The cardboard box was lighter than Jack Mercer expected. 6 years should have weighed more. He stood beside the elevator on basement level 2 with one hand under the box and the other holding a paper envelope from Human Resources. Inside were 3 pages explaining that Bennett Rowe Holdings appreciated his service, that his position had been eliminated as part of organizational restructuring, and that his health coverage would continue through the end of the month. The language was clean, the kind of language written by people who never had to look at the person reading it. Behind him, the basement office hummed with server fans, fluorescent lights, and a printer that had been making the same grinding noise for 3 years. Nothing sounded different because he was leaving. Jack looked down at the box. A black coffee mug with a faded Chicago Cubs logo. A framed photograph of Hannah on the lakefront, her dark hair blown across her face as she laughed. A drawing from Emma, done in purple marker, of 2 stick figures holding hands under a giant yellow sun. And beneath all of it, a plain manila folder he was not supposed to have. 2 days earlier, Jack had been standing in conference room 16 with a cable tester in his pocket and no invitation to speak. The Harbor Point acquisition team had been fighting with the video wall for 20 minutes. Jack had been sent upstairs because no one else could figure out why the Chicago office kept losing the live document feed from outside counsel. He fixed it in 6 minutes. He should have left. Instead, he noticed the agreement on the screen. Page 147, Cyber Liability. The clause looked wrong, not obviously wrong. It was wrong in the way a missing stair is wrong when you know the staircase by memory. Jack had spent months supporting the deal room. He had seen version after version move through the secure system. He knew the original structure, even though no one had asked him to. Victor Hale was arguing with 2 attorneys. "We need Harbor Point to stop reopening settled language," Victor said. One attorney replied, "They are saying the indemnity is too broad." "They have said that for 3 weeks." Jack looked at the screen again. The original buyer protection was gone, not softened. Gone. He spoke before he could stop himself. "Which version are you using?" The room went quiet. Victor turned. Jack pointed toward the screen. The cyber carve-out. That was not the language in the original term sheet. Victor's expression barely moved. "Mr. Mercer, correct?" "Yes, you are here for technical support." "I know, then support the technology." Jack should have nodded and left. He knew that. He also knew the document system had preserved every edit. The version history says the protection was removed manually. Victor smiled, but only with his mouth. "That is not your concern." Jack met his eyes. "It becomes my concern if someone plans to say the document transfer corrupted the clause." The silence changed. One of the lawyers looked back at the screen. Victor did not. "Thank you, Mr. Mercer. Your assistance is no longer required." Jack gathered his tools. At the door, Victor said, and Jack looked back. "Learn the difference between seeing something and understanding it." Jack left without answering. By Friday afternoon, his badge stopped working. The termination meeting lasted 11 minutes. His supervisor kept saying the decision had come from above. Human Resources kept saying it was not performance-related. Jack asked who had authorized it. Neither answered. He did not ask twice. Before shutting down his workstation, he opened the Harbor Point file one last time. The metadata was still there. Original buyer protection. Deleted 8 months earlier. User initials. VH, Victor Hale. Jack had no proof of motive, only a trail. He printed the version logs, the original term sheet, and the page showing the removed clause. He knew company policy. No proprietary transaction materials could leave the building. He also knew what happened to digital records when powerful people decided those records had become inconvenient. Jack slid the pages into a folder. "This isn't theft," he whispered. The empty cubicle offered no opinion. "It's insurance." Now that folder rested beneath a coffee mug and a child's drawing. The elevator arrived. Jack stepped inside. No one stopped him. In the lobby, Earl Simmons looked up from the security desk. Earl had worked that entrance longer than some executives had worked at the company. He had silver at his temples, a bad right knee, and the habit of remembering the names of people no one else noticed. His eyes went to the box. "No card, I travel light." Earl came around the desk and took one side anyway. They walked toward the employee garage. Outside Chicago, rain turned the afternoon gray. "You coming back Monday?" Earl asked. Jack looked ahead. "No." Earl slowed. "They let you go." Jack shrugged. Apparently, the printers finally won. Earl did not laugh. At Jack's car, he helped lower the box into the trunk. "You did good work down there." For reasons Jack could not explain, that sentence hurt more than the termination letter. Maybe because Earl meant it. "Thanks, Earl." Earl nodded toward the tower. "People up there forget the building still stands because somebody keeps the lights on." Jack looked at the glass floors disappearing into the rain. Sometimes they forget a lot of things. He drove home. By the time he reached Oak Park, the rain had softened to a mist. His house sat on a quiet street, lined with old maples and narrow brick homes. A blue bicycle lay beside the porch steps. A pink helmet hung from the handlebar. Jack pulled into the driveway and sat behind the wheel without turning off the engine. For 6 years, this house had been his proof that he had made the right choice. No hotel suites, no late flights, no airport lounges while Emma sent pictures from school events he could not attend. Dinner at 6, homework at 7, pancakes on Saturday, soccer on Sunday. Ordinary. He had wanted ordinary so badly that he had built his whole life around it. Now, he had to walk inside and tell his daughter that even ordinary could disappear. The front door opened before he reached it. Emma stood there in socks, leggings, and a sweatshirt 2 sizes too big. "You're early." Jack stopped on the porch. She had Hannah's eyes. That was still unfair sometimes. He forced a smile. "Lucky day." Emma looked toward the driveway. "Where's your work bag in the car?" "Why, because I left it there." She narrowed her eyes. "Did your boss finally discover weekends?" "Something like that." Emma studied him. Then she stepped aside. "Are we still getting pizza?" Something loosened in his chest. "We are absolutely still getting pizza. Pepperoni. Obviously. Extra cheese. Now you're abusing the situation." She grinned and ran toward the kitchen. Jack stayed by the door for a moment. He had not told her. Not yet. During dinner, Emma talked about a science quiz, a girl named Sophie whose plant experiment had died, and a substitute teacher who pronounced Illinois as if the final letters mattered. Jack listened. He laughed when she expected him to. Every few minutes, his mind returned to the envelope in his jacket pocket. After dinner, Emma spread her math homework across the kitchen table. Jack stood at the sink washing plates. The window reflected the kitchen behind him. Emma chewing the end of a pencil. The refrigerator covered with school notices. Hannah's photograph tucked beside a grocery list. For 1 second another, Jack Mercer stared back from the glass. 32 years old, tailored navy suit, Manhattan 40 floors below him. A conference room at Sterling Wynn Capital filled with lawyers and bankers. Everyone was speaking at once. The seller wanted more money. The buyer wanted more control. Outside counsel wanted another week. Jack sat at the end of the table and listened. He had learned early that people revealed more when they believed silence meant weakness. A senior banker finally turned toward him. "Jack, are you planning to contribute?" Jack flipped one page. "If you keep fighting about price, this deal dies tonight." The banker sighed. "We are fighting about price because price is the issue." "No." Jack tapped the governance section. "The seller agreed to the number 3 drafts ago." A lawyer frowned. "Then why reopen the economics?" "Because they are afraid the buyer can remove their founder 6 months after close." The room quieted. Jack crossed out one sentence. "They don't need another 20 million. They need protection here." 3 words changed. The argument ended. By midnight, the deal had a path. That was who Jack had been. The man people flew across oceans because he could hear the fear underneath a negotiation before anyone else knew fear was in the room. He had loved it once. The speed, the pressure, the moment chaos finally made sense. He had also believed there would always be time to make up for what it cost. Jack looked at Hannah's photograph. That belief had died before she did. The memory came without permission. A hotel conference room in Boston, Jack's phone vibrating beside a stack of documents. Hannah calling. He silenced it. 5 minutes later, it vibrated again. He turned it face down. 20 minutes later, another call. Unknown number. Jack ignored that one too. The deal signed at 4:17. At 4:26, Jack stepped into the hallway and returned the call. A doctor answered. Hannah had collapsed at a grocery store. A ruptured aneurysm. No warning. An ambulance had taken her to Northwestern Memorial. Jack remembered saying, "I'm in Boston," as if geography were an explanation. The doctor went quiet. "You should come as soon as you can." By the time Jack reached Chicago, Hannah was gone. Emma was too. She slept that night in a hospital waiting room with her head against Jack's chest. He was still wearing the suit from the closing. Within 6 months, he left Sterling Wynn. Within a year, he stopped answering calls from the industry. People assumed grief had broken him. They were partly right. What they did not understand was that Jack had not left because he could no longer do the work. He left because he still could. He knew how easy it would be to return to 12-hour negotiations, late flights, important clients, and the addictive feeling of being needed. So he chose a life that did not need that version of him. He took technical courses, learned systems administration, found he liked problems that stayed solved once you fixed them. A broken monitor did not call at midnight. A server did not care whether he wore a suit. Then Bennett Rowe hired him. Basement level 2, 8:30 to 5, home for dinner. 6 years passed. He never told anyone who he had been. Emma only knew that her father fixed computers and made pancakes badly shaped enough to be funny. Dad. He blinked. Emma was looking at him. "You're washing the same plate." Jack looked down. She was right. Quality control. "You've been washing it for like 5 minutes. High standards." She smiled but kept watching him. "You're weird tonight. I'm always weird. More weird." Jack set the plate in the drying rack. "Finish question 6. She groaned. "That is not an answer. It is a parental redirect. That's not a real thing. It is in this house." Emma returned to her homework. Jack almost told her then. He almost said that he had lost his job, that the morning routine would change, that money might be tighter until he found something else. Instead, he looked at her bent over the worksheet. "Dad." "Yeah, can we still go to the lake tomorrow if it doesn't rain?" Jack swallowed. Of course, that was enough truth for tonight. At 9:30, he tucked Emma into bed. She held up the book they had been reading. 1 chapter. "You said that last night and turned 1 chapter into 4. It was a cliffhanger. You're 9. I can understand suspense." Jack sat beside her. Apparently. By the time the chapter ended, Emma's eyes were closing. At the door, she spoke into the dark. "Dad." He stopped. "You would tell me if something bad happened, right?" The question landed harder because of how casually she asked it. Jack kept his hand on the doorframe. "Yes." A pause. "If it was something you needed to know." Emma seemed satisfied. "Okay, good night, Em." "Night." Jack closed the door almost all the way and stood in the hallway hating himself for the technical accuracy of his answer. He went outside and retrieved the cardboard box. At the kitchen table, he removed the mug, Hannah's photograph, Emma's drawing, then the folder. He opened it. The Harbor Point acquisition stared back at him in black ink. The clause Victor had removed dealt with responsibility for undisclosed cyber incidents that happened before closing but were discovered afterward. Without it, Bennett Rowe could inherit liability for a breach Harbor Point caused before Bennett Rowe owned the company. A serious breach could mean lawsuits, regulatory penalties, customer claims, and years of litigation. But Harbor Point's lawyers were not refusing all protection. Jack understood what they feared. Bennett Rowe's current language could leave Harbor Point exposed indefinitely for minor incidents discovered years later. The two sides were arguing over whether the clause should exist. The real question was how long it should survive. and how much liability it should cover. Jack pulled a legal pad from a drawer. For the first time in years, his handwriting changed. Shorter, faster, 24-month survival period, liability cap, specific protection for intentionally concealed incidents, separate treatment for breaches discovered before signing, escrow protection. He wrote the structure in less than 10 minutes, then stopped. This was not his problem anymore. Bennett and Rowe had fired him. Victor had made sure of it. Jack could close the folder, go upstairs, sleep, and wake up Saturday morning unemployed but free. He stared at the page. Somewhere downtown, lawyers were probably still fighting over language they misunderstood because nobody wanted to admit they were negotiating the wrong issue. Jack rubbed both hands over his face. Leave it alone. The house was silent. He stood, made coffee, sat again. Not your company. He closed the folder. 30 seconds later, he opened it. Hannah's photograph sat near the refrigerator. She had once accused him of being physically incapable of watching someone load a dishwasher incorrectly. He had told her there was a correct system. She laughed for 5 straight minutes. Jack could almost hear it. He opened his personal laptop. He searched public filings from similar logistics acquisitions. He pulled precedent language from transactions anyone could access. He compared caps, survival periods, and disclosure standards. By 11:30, he had a framework. By midnight, he had a counterproposal. At 12:40, he rewrote it because the first version sounded like a lawyer trying to win. At 1:20, he rewrote it again so Harbor Point's counsel could accept it without looking weak. That mattered. People like to believe negotiations turned on logic. They often turned on dignity. At 1:58, Jack finished a 6-page memorandum. No accusation, no mention of Victor, no complaint about being fired. Just the problem, the risk, and a way through. He entered the email address for Bennett and Rowe's general counsel. His finger hovered over the keyboard. If he sent it, there was no taking back the fact that he had involved himself. If he did not, he could pretend the last 6 years had ended cleanly. Jack looked down at the signature line. Jack Mercer, IT Systems Support. He deleted the second line. For 10 years, he had hidden from the name that used to make people return calls. He typed slowly. Jack Mercer, formerly Sterling Wind Capital. He read the memorandum one final time, then clicked send. The clock read 2:14 a.m. Jack leaned back. No music, no applause. Just the refrigerator humming and rain tapping softly against the window. Then a floorboard creaked. Dad Jack turned. Emma stood in the hallway wrapped in her blanket. Her hair was flattened on one side. "What are you doing? Couldn't sleep?" She shuffled into the kitchen and looked at the laptop. "Work." Jack hesitated. Sort of. "I thought you said weekends were for normal people." That was before 2 in the morning became technically Saturday. Emma climbed into the chair beside him. She looked at the legal pad. "I don't understand any of that. Most people don't." She yawned. "Do you?" Jack looked at the sent message, at a name he had not used professionally in a decade. "Yeah." Emma rested her head against his arm. "Is it for your new job?" Jack went still. There it was, the lie waiting for him before he had even decided to tell it. He looked down at his daughter. Not tonight. He could give her one more night without worry. "Maybe." Emma nodded sleepily. "Does the new job have windows?" Jack smiled. "I'll put it on the list. And you have to be home for dinner." His smile faded. Emma did not notice. She was already halfway asleep against him. Jack closed the laptop. "That one goes at the top." He carried her back to bed. When he returned to the kitchen, the screen had gone dark. His reflection floated faintly across it. For the first time in years, he did not look like the man in the basement. He did not look like the man from Manhattan either. He looked tired, older, uncertain, but awake in a way he had not been for a long time. Jack picked up the manila folder and slid it into the bottom drawer beneath old tax returns and school paperwork. Then he turned off the kitchen light. Across the city, the message he had sent was already waiting in an inbox. Jack did not know whether anyone would read it. He only knew he had finally stopped pretending he had not seen the problem. By 8:30 Monday morning, Jack Mercer's email had become the most important document in the building. Natalie Bennett sat alone in her office with the Harbor Point agreement open on one screen and Jack's personnel file on another. Outside the glass walls, the executive floor had returned to its usual rhythm. Assistants carried coffee, phones rang. Lawyers moved between conference rooms with folders against their chests. The company looked exactly the same as it had on Friday. That was the part Natalie could not get past. The place had not trembled when Jack Mercer lost his job. Nobody upstairs had stopped working. Nobody had called her. No warning had reached her office. A man capable of solving the problem that had kept 3 law firms and half her executive team awake for 72 hours had been escorted out of the building with a cardboard box, and the machine had simply kept running. Natalie looked again at the personnel photograph on her screen. Jack looked tired in it. Not unhappy, not angry. Just like a man who had learned long ago not to expect anyone taking an employee badge photo to care who he really was. She opened his resume. 6 years at Bennett Rowe. System support, document management, secure file administration. Before that, 3 years listed simply as independent technical consulting. Nothing else. Natalie leaned back. Come on. She searched his name again. The first results were ordinary. Professional directories, old public records, a few meaningless references. Then she added another term, Sterling Wynn Capital. The page changed. Natalie stopped moving. An archived financial article loaded slowly. The photograph at the top was more than 10 years old. Jack stood beside 3 men in suits outside a hotel in Manhattan. He looked younger, sharper, almost severe. The headline beneath the photograph read, "The quiet negotiator behind 3 of the decade's biggest acquisitions." Natalie read the first paragraph, then the second, then the entire article. Jack had not been some junior analyst. He had not been a consultant who occasionally sat in important rooms. He had structured acquisitions across manufacturing, transportation, and telecommunications. He had been known for walking into negotiations everyone else considered dead and finding the one issue neither side was actually talking about. One executive quoted in the article described him as the person you wanted in the room when everyone had run out of polite options. Another article called him ruthless. A third called him unusually calm under pressure. Then around 10 years ago, the coverage stopped. No retirement announcement, no move to another firm, no scandal, no interview. Jack Mercer simply disappeared. Natalie pulled his employee badge photo onto the screen beside the old photograph. Same eyes, same jaw. The difference was not age, it was volume. The man in the old photograph took up space. The man on the company badge seemed to have learned how not to. Natalie stared at both images. "You were in my basement." She said it softly. The sentence sounded absurd in the quiet office. Someone knocked. Lena opened the door. "You asked for everything on Jack Mercer." Natalie turned from the screen. "Close the door." Lena did. Natalie pointed to the chair across from her desk. "When did you know?" Lena looked confused. "Know what? That he was Sterling Wynn." The confusion was real. "I didn't." Natalie studied her. Lena looked at the article. Her eyes widened. "That's him?" "Yes. I swear, Natalie, I had no idea." Natalie believed her. That only made the situation worse. How does someone like this work here for 6 years without anyone knowing? Lena gave the only honest answer. Maybe because nobody asked. Natalie looked back at the screen. That sentence stayed in the room. She opened Jack's performance history. Strong reviews, reliable, thorough, consistently praised for solving problems quickly. Never requested promotion, never applied to transfer, never complained about pay. Then 8 months earlier, the tone changed. A management note from Victor Hale. Employee demonstrates difficulty respecting functional boundaries. Another. Employee repeatedly involves himself in matters outside assigned scope. Another. Recommendation that Mercer be removed from executive transaction support. Natalie read them slowly. Who wrote these? Lena did not need to look. Victor. Why would the COO care which IT technician gets assigned to a deal room? Lena's hands folded more tightly in her lap. I don't know. Natalie looked up. Lena met her eyes for only a second, then looked toward the door, a small movement, almost nothing. But Natalie had spent most of her professional life watching people negotiate around what they were afraid to say. She knew the difference between uncertainty and fear. Lena, I really don't know. That wasn't the question. Lena went still. Natalie lowered her voice. What are you afraid of? For a moment, Lena looked as if she might answer. Then she stood. I have your 10 o'clock moved to 11. Legal is waiting on the Harbor Point call. The wall came back up. Natalie let it. For now, fine. Lena reached the door. Natalie spoke before she left. If Victor asks what we discussed, tell him I was reviewing personnel exposure after a termination. Lena turned. That's true? Yes. Natalie closed Jack's file. It just isn't all of it. Lena nodded and left. Natalie spent the next 2 hours rebuilding Jack's 6 years at Bennett Rowe from scraps nobody had considered important enough to connect. 3 years earlier, Jack had flagged a permissions error that allowed outside counsel to access a restricted financing folder. The issue was corrected quietly. No executive ever learned his name. 18 months earlier, he identified a corrupted data import before a board presentation. The technology director received praise for preventing a larger failure. Jack's name appeared only in the work ticket. 11 months earlier, he found an inconsistency in a due diligence archive that led a legal associate to correct a disclosure schedule. Again, no credit, no complaint. Natalie sat back. Jack had not suddenly become useful on Friday night. He had been useful every day. The company had simply trained itself to notice usefulness only when it came with the right title. Her phone buzzed. Victor. She let it ring twice before answering. Natalie. I understand you are reviewing Mercer's personnel history. She looked through the glass toward his office. Victor stood with his back to her phone against his ear. I review whatever I need to review. He was terminated correctly. That isn't what I asked. You didn't ask anything, then why are you defending it? Victor turned slightly. She could see his reflection in the window. I'm protecting the company from turning one unusual weekend into a mythology problem. Natalie almost smiled. A mythology problem. He had prior finance experience. Fine. He sent legal a useful memo. Fine. That does not mean he belonged here. He did belong here. We hired him. You know what I mean. No, Victor. I'm becoming increasingly interested in what you mean. Silence. He changed tone. Softer. More paternal. A tone he often used when he wanted to remind her how long he had worked beside her father. Your father understood that organizations fail when every employee decides authority is optional. Natalie looked at Jack's old article. My father also understood acquisitions, better than anyone. Then he would probably want to know why you removed buyer protection from Harbor Point. Victor did not answer immediately. Natalie heard the hesitation. Tiny, but there. That clause was part of an evolving negotiation. Your initials are on the deletion. I edit documents. You personally edited that one at 11:12 at night. And 2 days ago you fired the employee who asked why. Victor's voice cooled. Be careful about building narratives from coincidence. Natalie's eyes stayed on his office. I'm not building anything yet. Good. Victor hung up. Natalie lowered the phone. Across the floor, Victor remained by the window for several seconds before turning toward his desk. He did not look at her. By 6 that evening, most of the executive floor had emptied. Natalie remained. She read Jack's 6-page memorandum again. It was not merely smart. It was restrained. That bothered her more. Someone angry could have embarrassed the company. Someone bitter could have copied the board. Someone desperate could have attached a demand for severance or reinstatement. Jack had done none of it. He had seen a problem. He had fixed it. Then he had gone home. At 7:15, Natalie opened his personnel file again. Home address, Oak Park. She stared at it. A formal reinstatement letter would be easier. HR could deliver it. Legal could draft language. She could offer compensation, restore benefits, apologize in professionally acceptable paragraphs, and never have to stand in front of the man herself. The thought made her uncomfortable. That was how she knew she should not do it. At 10:23, Natalie parked across from a small brick bungalow under a street lamp. She turned off the engine. The neighborhood had gone mostly dark. A dog barked 2 houses away. Someone had left a porch light burning over a blue bicycle. Natalie sat with both hands on the steering wheel. She had negotiated with lenders threatening to freeze a credit line. She had addressed hundreds of employees after her father died. She had faced directors who had openly questioned whether 35 was too young to run the company. None of those moments had prepared her to knock on the door of an IT employee her organization had discarded. She finally got out. Cold air moved through the street. Natalie reached the porch. She lifted her hand. Before she knocked, the light inside shifted. The door opened. Jack stood there barefoot, wearing gray sweatpants and a dark t-shirt. He looked at her, then at the car, then back at her. "You found the memo?" Natalie lowered her hand. "You expected me, no." His eyes returned to the car. "But CEOs usually don't come to Oak Park at 10:30 because the Wi-Fi is down." The corner of Natalie's mouth moved. "I found something else." She held up a printed copy of the old Sterling Wynn article. Jack looked at it. His expression changed in a way she had not seen in his employee photo. "Something closed. That's less convenient. Is it true what part that you worked there? Yes. That you structured the Caldwell Aerospace acquisition? Yes. The Mercer-Rowland transaction? Yes. 3 international deals in 4 years. Jack leaned against the doorframe. "You did a lot of reading. You made it surprisingly difficult. That was intentional." Natalie looked at him. Why, Jack did not answer. She held up the article again. "This person disappears, and then somehow ends up fixing document systems in my basement. It was a good basement. I'm serious." "So am I." Natalie lowered the paper. "I want to understand." Jack looked past her toward the street. "You came here at 10:30 at night to understand my resume. Number good. I came because you saved a $50 million acquisition 12 hours after my company fired you." Jack's eyes came back to hers. "Your company fired me Friday. The deal signed Saturday morning. Then technically it was less than 12. Natalie stared at him. "Does nothing make you angry?" Jack gave a small laugh with no humor in it. "Plenty of things. You had every reason to let Harbor Point collapse. Yes. You could have watched us lose millions. Yes. You could have let Victor explain it to the board." Jack nodded. "That part was tempting. Then why didn't you?" Jack's face became still. For the first time since she arrived, he did not have an answer ready. He looked inside the house. Natalie followed his gaze. A child's backpack sat beside the stairs. A pair of small sneakers rested by the wall. On the refrigerator, visible from the doorway, a crooked drawing showed 2 people beneath an enormous yellow sun. Jack spoke quietly. "The deal wasn't bad." Natalie waited. "The people negotiating it were tired. Your lawyers were protecting their positions. Harbor Point's lawyers were protecting theirs. Everyone wanted to prove the other side was unreasonable. And you didn't. I wasn't in the room anymore. That helped. Sometimes the easiest way to see a negotiation clearly is to stop needing to win it." Natalie considered that. "You still haven't answered me." Jack looked down at the porch boards. "When I see work that can be fixed, I have a hard time watching someone destroy it because they're too proud to ask the right question." "That's it. That's enough. You did not do it for Bennett and Rowe. No. For me, no offense, none taken. For your old reputation," Jack looked almost annoyed. "I spent 10 years avoiding my old reputation. Then why sign Sterling Wynn? Because your lawyers needed to read the email." Natalie understood. If an unknown former IT employee sent the memo, legal might delete it. If Jack Mercer of Sterling Wynn sent it, someone would open the attachment. You knew the name still carried weight. I hoped it carried enough. Natalie looked at him for a long moment. "You were right." Before Jack could answer, a small voice came from behind him. Dad Jack's entire posture changed. Not dramatically. His shoulders simply softened. He turned. Emma stood in the hallway wearing pajamas covered with planets, one hand rubbing her eye. "What are you doing up?" I heard talking. "It's grown-up talking." Emma looked around him at Natalie. "Who is she?" Jack stepped aside slightly. "This is Natalie." Emma waited. Jack sighed. "She works where I used to work." Natalie felt the words before Emma did. "Used to." Emma frowned. "Used to." Jack closed his eyes for half a second. What bed?" Emma ignored him. She looked at Natalie. "Are you his boss?" Natalie glanced at Jack. "Not anymore." Emma's eyes sharpened. "Did you fire him?" Jack stepped forward. "Emma." Natalie lifted a hand. "It's okay." She looked directly at the girl. "My company did." Emma took that in. Why, Natalie could have given her the kind of answer companies gave adults. Restructuring, role alignment, operational decisions. Instead, she said, "We made a mistake." Emma tilted her head. "Was he bad at his job?" Natalie looked at Jack. "No. Was he late?" "No. Did he break something?" Jack muttered. "This is turning into an investigation." Emma ignored him. Natalie said no. Emma looked genuinely confused. Then that was kind of dumb. Jack pressed his lips together. Emma, what it was. Natalie laughed. It escaped before she could stop it. A real laugh. Jack looked at her with mild surprise. She isn't wrong, Natalie said. Emma nodded, satisfied. Okay. Jack pointed toward the hall. Bed. Emma started walking, then turned back. Dad. Yeah, are we still going to the lake Saturday? Jack's expression softened. Yes. Promise. Emma looked at Natalie one more time. Good night. Good night, Emma. She disappeared down the hallway. A door closed softly. The quiet that remained felt different. Natalie looked at Jack. She doesn't know. No. That you lost your job. No. Why, Jack rested one hand against the doorframe. She's 9. She noticed something. She notices everything. You still didn't tell her. Jack's eyes moved toward the hallway. Her mother died when she was 2. She learned uncertainty before she learned how to spell it. Natalie said nothing. Jack continued. I spent years making her life predictable. Same house, same school, dinner at the same table. I didn't want one bad Friday becoming something she had to carry before I knew what it meant. Natalie looked past him at the small house. Nothing about it was impressive in the language she was used to. No designer furniture, no art selected by consultants, no view of downtown. But the place felt inhabited, warm. A child's jacket hung over the back of a chair. A half-completed puzzle covered one corner of the dining table. Someone had left a mug in the sink. It was the opposite of her apartment. Her apartment looked exactly the way it had looked the day she moved in. Jack noticed where she was looking. You came here for something besides the biography? Yes. Natalie straightened. I came to offer your job back. No. She blinked. I haven't offered it. I know. You don't know what I'm offering. Same building. That is technically true. Same company. Yes. The company that decided I was disposable 48 hours ago. Natalie let the words land. I'm not asking you to pretend that didn't happen. Good. I'm trying to correct it. Those aren't the same thing. I know. That made Jack pause. Natalie stepped closer, not enough to invade his space, just enough that the conversation no longer felt like something happening across a porch. Victor signed your termination. Yes. HR processed it. Yes, I didn't know. I assumed. Natalie looked him in the eyes. But my name is on the building. Jack did not respond. So I don't get to stand here and tell you this happened somewhere below my level of responsibility. Something in his expression shifted. Small, barely visible. Natalie continued, I should have known what kind of company I was running. I should have known when an employee with 6 years of strong reviews suddenly became disruptive 8 months ago. I should have asked why. Jack looked at her differently now. Not warmer, but more carefully. Natalie swallowed. I'm sorry. No corporate language, no explanation, just the words. Jack looked toward the street. You don't owe me a porch apology. I think I do. You didn't sign the termination. I signed the structure that gave Victor authority to do it without anyone asking me. That silenced him. Natalie added, maybe that's worse. Jack gave a quiet breath. At least you know the difference. For several seconds, neither spoke. The neighborhood was almost completely still. Natalie could hear a train somewhere in the distance. Finally, Jack said, I'm not coming back to IT. I didn't ask you to. His eyes narrowed slightly. Then, what are you asking? Natalie hesitated. The honest answer was that she did not fully know yet. I'm asking you not to close the door before I understand what happened. Jack looked down at the article still in her hand. You understand what happened? Victor thought I was annoying, so he got rid of me. I don't believe that anymore. Jack's expression became more serious. Good. Natalie watched him. You don't sound surprised. I'm not. What do you know? Jack stepped outside and pulled the door almost closed behind him. His voice lowered. 2 days before I was fired, I asked Victor why the buyer protection had been manually removed. You told me that, no? Jack met her eyes. I told him the metadata showed it had been removed. Natalie waited. He didn't ask what metadata. She understood. Someone innocent might have asked what Jack had found. Victor had immediately known which edit he meant. Jack continued. He told me to stay in my lane. Then I got locked out 2 days later. That still could be retaliation for embarrassing him. It could. But you don't think it is? No. Why? Jack looked through the front window toward the kitchen, then back at Natalie. Because men like Victor don't spend 8 months keeping one basement technician away from executive deal rooms because their feelings are hurt. Natalie remembered Lena's face. The glance toward the door. The fear. What are you saying? I'm saying you're asking the wrong question. Natalie's voice became quieter. What question should I be asking? Jack leaned against the porch railing. Not why he fired me. A car passed at the end of the street, headlights sliding briefly across both of them. Jack waited until it disappeared. Then he said, "Ask why a chief operating officer personally removed protection from a $50 million acquisition." Natalie felt something cold settle behind her ribs. And then ask why he spent 8 months making sure nobody who noticed could get close enough to notice again. Natalie stared at him. Jack opened the door. "Good night, Natalie." She did not move. "Jack." He looked back. "Do you still have the records?" His face gave nothing away. "I have enough to remember what I saw." It was not an answer. Natalie understood that too. She walked down the porch steps. At the car, she turned. Jack was still standing in the doorway. Not the technician from his badge photo. Not the young negotiator from the article. Something between the two. A man who had spent years trying not to matter to rooms like hers and had somehow become the only person in Chicago who could explain what was wrong inside one. Natalie opened the car door. "Tomorrow morning I'm going through every Harbor Point file Victor touched." Jack gave a small nod. "Start with the version history." I already did. "Then check who stopped getting access after each edit." Natalie looked at him. "You've thought about this for 8 months." He went inside. The porch light remained on. Natalie stood beside the car for several seconds before getting in. She did not drive home. She drove back downtown. At 12:18 in the morning, the Bennett Rowe tower was nearly dark. Natalie rode the elevator alone to the executive floor. She walked past her office, past legal, past the silent conference rooms, then stopped outside Lena Ortiz's desk. A small framed photograph sat beside the monitor. Lena with an older woman in a wheelchair, both smiling at the camera. Natalie looked toward Victor Hale's dark office at the far end of the floor. She remembered Lena glancing at the door that morning. Fear had a way of making ordinary movements look meaningless until someone knew where to look. Natalie unlocked her office. She opened the Harbor Point access records. 8 months, hundreds of entries. She filtered the users removed from transaction support. Jack Mercer. Then another name. Then another. Natalie leaned closer. 3 employees had raised documentation questions during the Harbor Point process. All 3 had later been moved away from the deal. Only one had been fired. Jack. Natalie reached for her phone. It was after midnight. She stopped before calling Lena. Instead, she opened a blank document and began writing down dates. Victor's edit. Jack's first question. Jack's removal from executive support. The final Harbor Point dispute. Jack's termination. The 2:14 a.m. memorandum. For the first time, the events no longer looked like separate management decisions. They looked like a pattern. At the bottom of the page, Natalie typed one sentence. Why did Victor need Harbor Point closed? She stared at the question, then saved the file. Across town, Jack Mercer stood alone in his kitchen drinking water beneath the refrigerator light. Emma's bedroom door was closed. The house was quiet again. He opened the bottom drawer. The manila folder was still there. Jack rested his hand on it. For 8 months he had kept the pages because he did not trust the people above him. Tonight, for the first time, he wondered whether there might be one person upstairs he could trust enough to read them. The folder stayed in the drawer until morning. Jack knew exactly where it was while he made coffee. He knew where it was while Emma complained that one sock had disappeared in the dryer. He knew where it was while he packed her lunch and cut an apple into slices because she refused to eat it whole for reasons she had never explained. He knew where it was when she stood by the front door with her backpack hanging from one shoulder. You're not dressed for work. Jack looked down at his jeans. No. Emma frowned. So your new job doesn't start today. Jack reached for her coat. We're still figuring that out. Who is we? Jack paused. Emma watched him. He had learned a long time ago that 9-year-olds did not need complete information to know when adults were rearranging the truth. Me and some people. That sounds suspicious. It probably is. She pushed her arms into the coat. Is Natalie one of the people? Jack looked at her. Emma smiled. You said her name differently. I said her name normally. No. What does differently mean? Emma considered this. Like you were thinking about something. Jack opened the door. Bus, that is another parental redirect. You've been learning. Emma stepped outside. At the sidewalk, she turned. Dad, yeah, if you get a new job, you still have to come to the science fair. I know. It's Thursday at 6. I know. You promised. Jack looked at her. I'll be there. Emma studied his face one last time, then ran toward the corner where 3 other children were waiting. Jack stayed on the porch until the school bus disappeared. Then he went back inside. He opened the kitchen drawer. The folder seemed heavier in daylight. He carried it to the table. For 8 months, the pages had been protection. Now they felt like a decision. Jack opened his laptop. Before he could type anything, his phone rang. New York area code. He stared at the number. It took 3 rings before he answered. Mercer. A familiar voice laughed. There he is. Jack closed his eyes. Ben. Please tell me the rumor is wrong. What rumor that Jack Mercer came out of retirement and closed Harbor Point from an IT basement? Jack leaned back. Finance people need better hobbies. I'm serious. So am I. Ben Carver had worked 2 floors above Jack at Sterling Wynn. They had fought over deal structures, stolen each other's conference rooms, and spent more nights eating bad takeout under fluorescent lights than either would admit. Ben had also been one of the few people Jack called after Hannah died. How did you get this number? Jack asked. You have used the same number for 12 years. That was careless. You were always terrible at disappearing. I managed 10 years. Not anymore. Jack looked at the folder. Apparently. Ben's voice softened. I heard what happened. Which part? All of it. That is unlikely. I heard Bennett and Rowe nearly lost Harbor Point. I heard somebody sent legal a structure after midnight. I heard the structure came from you. Jack said nothing. Ben continued. You still got it. That is not a medical diagnosis. You know what I mean. Jack stood and walked toward the kitchen window. Outside, a neighbor dragged a trash bin toward the curb. Normal morning, normal street, normal life. I did one memo. You closed a deal nobody else could close. I gave them a way to stop arguing. That is what closing deals is. Jack rubbed his forehead. Why are you calling? There was a pause. Then Ben said, Come back. Jack almost laughed. No, you do not even know what I'm offering. I know enough. Partner? Jack went still. Ben continued. Carver Advisory, equity, your own team, you pick the clients. No, Jack, no. The base alone is more than you made in your last 4 years combined. Jack looked toward Emma's cereal bowl in the sink. That is not helping. You loved this work. I loved a lot of things that were bad for me. That is not the same. Sometimes it is. Ben exhaled. I am not asking you to become 28 again. Good. My back would object. I'm asking whether you really want to spend the rest of your life pretending you are not one of the best people I have ever seen in a negotiation room. Jack looked out the window. There had been a time when that sentence would have felt like oxygen. Now it mostly felt dangerous. I'm not pretending. Then what are you doing raising my daughter? You can do both. Jack laughed once. That sounds exactly like something someone without a 9-year-old would say. Ben was quiet. Jack continued. I know what both looks like for me. You know what it looked like 10 years ago. That was enough. Was it? Jack did not answer. Ben let the silence sit. Finally, there is a seat here if you want it. I don't. You might. No, you always negotiated too quickly when you were scared. Jack's jaw tightened. I'm not scared. Then take a week before you say no again. Ben hung up. Jack stared at the phone. He hated that the call had unsettled him. He hated more that part of him had already started calculating. Salary, school tuition, college, a larger emergency fund, a house without a 30-year mortgage. The numbers came easily. They always had. Then another set arrived. Flights, late dinners, weekend calls. Emma sitting in an auditorium looking toward an empty chair. Jack put the phone face down. He opened the folder again. At Bennett Rowe, Natalie had been in her office since 7. Lena arrived at 7:43 and found the door already open. Natalie stood beside the windows holding 2 pages of access records. "Come in." Lena stopped. "I have the morning briefing in 15 minutes. Cancel it." Natalie closed the door. Lena did. Natalie placed the pages on the desk. 3 people were moved away from Harbor Point after raising document questions. Lena looked at the paper. "I wouldn't know. Jack Mercer." Silence. "Peter Collins from Compliance." Lena's eyes changed. "And Rachel Kim from Legal Operations." Natalie watched her. All within 8 months. Lena sat slowly. Natalie lowered herself into the chair across from her rather than taking the one behind the desk. "This is not a disciplinary meeting." Lena nodded. "I know. No, I don't think you do." Natalie slid the papers closer. "I am not asking what Victor did." Lena looked up. "I am asking what he made you do." The room went silent. Lena's lips parted, then closed. Natalie waited. She had learned from her father that silence made nervous people talk. She had also learned much later that sometimes silence gave frightened people enough room to decide whether they could trust you. Lena finally spoke. 8 months ago, Victor asked me who was assigned to Harbor Point executive support. Why? He said he wanted fewer unnecessary people seeing transaction materials. Jack was unnecessary. He asked specifically about Jack. Natalie did not move. What did he say? Lena looked toward the door. Natalie stood, walked over, and locked it. Lena noticed. He said Jack Mercer was never to be assigned to a major deal room again. Permanently, yes. Reason none. You did it, yes. Natalie did not soften the next question, while Lena looked down at her hands. Because Victor Hale had been COO for 11 years. Because he worked with your father. Because when Victor gives an instruction, nobody asks whether it is a request. Natalie absorbed that. Did he threaten you? Lena looked up quickly. No. Too quickly. Natalie said nothing. Lena looked away. Not then. Natalie's voice became quieter. When Lena stood. I need to get the briefing rescheduled. Lena, I really do. Natalie looked at her for a long moment. Then she unlocked the door. Lena stopped beside it. Natalie said, if there is something you are protecting, make sure it deserves what protecting it is costing you. Lena's hand stayed on the door handle. She did not turn around. I'll move the briefing. Then she left. Natalie remained standing. Across the floor, Victor's office was empty. His assistant said he had left for a client breakfast. Natalie no longer believed in convenient timing. At 10:15, Jack received an email from Natalie. No greeting, no long explanation, just one sentence. I want to make you an offer that does not require you to become the man you walked away from. Jack read it twice. Then he closed the laptop. At 3:30, Emma came home from school. She dropped her backpack in the hallway. Do we have markers? Desk drawer? The good ones. You have categories, obviously. She disappeared into the dining room. Jack was filling out an online application for a systems administrator job at a hospital. Salary reasonable, hours predictable, benefits solid, exactly the kind of position he should have wanted. He had been staring at the employment history section for 12 minutes. The website wanted 10 years. He typed Bennett and Rowe Holdings, then stopped. Emma returned with construction paper. What are you making? Jack asked. Something, very informative. It is not done. She sat across from him. For 20 minutes, the only sounds were marker caps clicking and Jack tapping keys. Finally, Emma held up the paper. 2 people stood outside a tall blue building. The windows were uneven squares. The sun occupied almost a quarter of the page. One stick figure had dark hair. The smaller one had a purple backpack. At the top, Emma had written, Dad's new job. Jack looked at it. There are a lot of windows. You need windows. Why your old office was underground. Technically, there were security monitors. That is sad. Jack laughed. Emma pointed at the smaller figure. That's me. I recognized the backpack. You come home here. She drew an arrow from the building toward a small house in the corner. Jack watched. Emma looked up. And you have to be home before dinner. There it was again. Not salary, not title, not prestige. A 9-year-old's employment contract. Jack touched the edge of the drawing. What time is dinner? 6. What if there's traffic? 6:15. Generous, I know. Jack looked at the half-finished hospital application, then at Natalie's email. At 5:10 he replied, "Tomorrow, 9. Natalie answered less than a minute later, "My office." Jack looked at the message. Emma was drawing clouds. He said I might have a meeting tomorrow. She did not look up. Does the building have windows? Yes. Good. At 8:57 the next morning, Jack stepped onto the executive floor of Bennett Rowe Holdings. He had never worked on that floor. He had repaired conference systems there, replaced cables, reset security panels, once crawled under a boardroom table while 6 directors continued discussing an acquisition as if he were part of the furniture. Today the receptionist stood when he approached. "Mr. Mercer." Jack almost looked behind him. "Natalie is expecting you." He noticed the first name, not Ms. Bennett. Natalie. Interesting. The receptionist led him past Victor's office. The door was closed. Jack did not slow. Natalie stood when he entered. She wore a dark blue suit and no jacket. There were 3 folders on her desk. No HR representative, no lawyer. Jack looked around. "You really do have windows." Natalie raised an eyebrow. Was that in doubt Emma had requirements? Natalie smiled. "Your daughter is conducting due diligence. She is aggressive. Sit." Jack did. Natalie remained standing for another moment, then moved around the desk and took the chair opposite him. "I do not want you back in IT." "Good. I want you as special advisor to the CEO on Harbor Point and transaction risk." "No." Natalie blinked. "You did not even pretend to think. I thought before I came. You did not know the title. Titles are usually the least expensive part of an offer." Natalie leaned back. "You know most people let the CEO finish. Most people still work here." She stared at him. Jack almost smiled. Natalie did too. Then the seriousness returned. "You report directly to me." "No, Jack, I built an entire life around not doing this. You sent a 6-page acquisition memo at 2 in the morning. That was a lapse. You enjoyed it." Jack did not answer. Natalie saw that. "You did. That is not relevant." "I think it is." Jack looked toward the windows. Chicago spread below them. Traffic moving along the river. Towers rising in every direction. He had once lived in rooms like this. Not literally. Emotionally. Rooms where the city looked small and everything important seemed to happen above street level. "I know what happens when I start believing the work matters more than everything around it." Natalie's expression changed. Jack continued. "I used to work 80-hour weeks and call it ambition." He looked down at his hands. "I missed dinners, weekends, doctor appointments. I once missed an anniversary dinner because somebody in London wanted an extra paragraph in a purchase agreement." Natalie stayed quiet. Then Hannah died. The words did not need decoration. "I spent years thinking the worst part was that I wasn't there when it happened." Jack looked at Natalie. It wasn't. She waited. "The worst part was knowing she had spent years asking me to be there before it happened." Natalie's eyes softened. Jack looked away. "I do not get to make that mistake with Emma. I am not asking you to. Everyone says that before the first emergency. Then define emergency." Jack looked back at her. Natalie continued. "You leave at 5:30. He frowned. "Every day unless the building is physically burning. That is not how deals work. Then we make this one work differently. No travel without notice. Fine. Emma comes first, obviously. No calls during her school events unless somebody is bleeding." Natalie nodded. "Reasonable. No announcement about Sterling Wynn." She hesitated, internally. "Your position has to exist. My position can exist. My past does not need a press release." "Agreed." Jack leaned back. "You're agreeing too quickly." Natalie almost smiled. "I learned from your daughter." Jack was quiet. She slid one folder toward him, read this. Inside were Jack's old performance reviews, then Victor's notes, then the access removal records Natalie had found. Jack read them. His expression hardened. "Peter Collins. You know him, compliance analyst. Quiet guy. He asked why the vendor security disclosures did not match the data room index. He was transferred 2 weeks later." Jack turned another page. "Rachel Kim, legal operations. She caught a version mismatch. She was removed from Harbor Point support." Jack closed the folder. Natalie said, "This is not only about your termination. I know. I have a company where people learned it is safer not to notice things." Jack looked at her. For the first time, the job offer stopped feeling like a job offer. Natalie continued, I do not need you to be who you were at Sterling Wynn. She leaned forward. I need someone in the room who cares more about whether something is true than whether saying it makes everyone uncomfortable. Jack looked down at the folder. Natalie said, "Help me understand what Victor was protecting." Jack did not answer for almost a minute. "Then I leave at 5:30. Natalie extended her hand. 5:30. Jack looked at it. "This is a terrible negotiation. Why you gave me everything? I am trying a new strategy. What strategy hiring the person who already knows where all the bodies are buried?" Jack looked at her. "That phrase feels unfortunate." Natalie laughed. Jack finally shook her hand. Her grip was firm. His was warm. Neither let go immediately. Only a second, maybe less. Then Jack pulled his hand back. "I start tomorrow." Natalie nodded. "You start today." That was not agreed. 5:30. Jack glanced at the clock. 9:40. You have almost 8 hours. You are already violating the spirit of the arrangement. Welcome back. Jack left her office at 9:42. Victor's assistant saw him. By 9:50, Victor knew. At 9:53, the door to Victor Hale's office slammed shut. Inside, Victor stood behind his desk, staring at an internal personnel notification. Jack Mercer, Special Advisor to the CEO, Executive Transaction Risk. Victor read it again, then picked up a glass of water. He threw it against the wall. The glass shattered beside a framed photograph of Victor and Natalie's father at a charity dinner. His breathing came hard. Jack Mercer back inside the building was not the problem. Jack Mercer with direct access to Natalie was. Victor opened a locked drawer. Inside was an older Harbor Point compensation memorandum. He pulled it out. The document outlined executive performance incentives for the quarter. Victor's annual bonus depended heavily on the acquisition closing before the reporting period ended. That alone was not improper. What sat beneath it was an email printout from Victor to Harbor Point's chief executive. 8 months earlier, Victor had privately promised that Bennett Rowe would remove several liability protections if Harbor Point stopped threatening to delay the closing. He had never received authority from the board. He had never told Natalie. When the legal team resisted, he removed the language himself. Then Jack Mercer noticed. Victor stared at Jack's new title. For months he had believed the problem had been solved. Now the problem had an office 2 doors from the CEO. Victor put the papers back into the drawer. His hands were steady again. That was how Victor handled fear. First came anger, then calculation. Jack's new office was smaller than Natalie's guest conference room. He liked it immediately. There was a desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet, and a window looking west. At 11:15, Natalie found him standing beside it. Well, Jack looked at the view. Emma will approve. Natalie noticed the drawing propped against his monitor. Dad's new job. 2 stick figures, a giant sun, a crooked building. She made that yesterday. Natalie stepped closer. "Is that you, I assume? Why are your arms so long?" I asked. "What did she say, artistic freedom?" Natalie laughed. Jack turned toward the desk. On his screen were 6 Harbor Point document versions. "You started already. You said today." "I did. I am documenting your management problems." Natalie leaned over his shoulder. "What did you find? Nothing yet. You have 6 windows open. That is how you get to nothing." She stood close enough that Jack caught the scent of her perfume. Subtle. Clean. He became suddenly aware of how little space there was between them. Natalie apparently noticed too. She straightened. "Let me know when nothing becomes something." Jack looked at her. "I thought CEOs liked updates. I like useful updates. High standards. I was told that was a strength." She left. Jack watched the doorway for a moment, then returned to the screen. The days settled into an unexpected rhythm. Jack arrived before 9, left before 6. Every evening he went home. No exceptions. Natalie tested the boundary once. At 5:28 on Wednesday, she appeared at his door holding a document. "I need 10 minutes." Jack looked at the clock. "You have 2. She stared at him. "Seriously, science fair." Natalie looked at the document, then at him. "Tomorrow." Jack stood. "You can come." She blinked. "To the science fair if this is urgent." Natalie looked horrified. "You are threatening to make me discuss indemnification beside baking soda volcanoes." "I am establishing incentives." She stepped aside. "Go." Jack smiled. Good decision. At 6'3", he walked into Emma's school gymnasium. Emma saw him from across the room. Her face lit up. Jack knew immediately he had made the right choice. The next morning, Natalie found a photograph taped beside Jack's drawing. Emma standing beside a cardboard model of the Chicago River, Jack beside her, both smiling. "You made it," Natalie said. Jack looked up. "I said I would." Something about the simplicity of the answer stayed with her. By Thursday evening, Jack had rebuilt enough of the Harbor Point history to understand the shape of the problem. He and Natalie sat in a conference room surrounded by printed drafts. Takeout containers sat unopened between them. Natalie rubbed her eyes. "I have read the word indemnification so many times it no longer looks English." Jack turned a page. "That usually happens around page 400. You could pretend to be tired. I am tired. You look exactly the same. That is genetics." Natalie watched him. "You were really good at this." Jack kept reading. "Past tense feels unnecessary." She smiled. "That sounded arrogant. I warned you. They worked another 20 minutes. Then Natalie noticed Jack had stopped turning pages. "What?" He pointed at a revision log. "This edit does not make sense." Which one Victor removed the protection before Harbor Point formally objected to it. Natalie leaned closer. "What does that mean?" "It means he was giving them something before they publicly asked for it." Why, Jack shook his head. "I don't know." A voice came from the doorway. "I do." Both looked up. Lena Ortiz stood there holding a manila folder against her chest. Her face was pale. Natalie stood. Lena entered slowly. She closed the door behind her. Jack looked at the folder. It was almost identical to the one sitting in his kitchen drawer. Lena placed it on the table. "I should have given you this 8 months ago." Natalie did not touch it. "What is it?" Lena's fingers trembled. "The original Harbor Point drafts." Jack opened the folder. The first pages showed the buyer protection intact. Then the edit. Victor's initials. Timestamp, 11:12 at night. Then an internal compensation schedule. Jack read it. His expression changed. Natalie noticed. "What?" He slid the paper toward her. Natalie read the number beside Victor's name. Her eyes narrowed. His bonus depended on the acquisition closing before quarter end. Lena sat down. "There is more." Jack turned the page. An email. Victor to Harbor Point's CEO. No lawyers copied. No Natalie. No board. Victor had promised to soften the liability structure in exchange for Harbor Point keeping the closing on schedule. Natalie stared at the page. He gave away company protection to save his bonus. Lena shook her head. "Not only the bonus." Natalie looked up. Lena's voice became quieter. "Victor told your father before he died that he could increase annual deal volume by 20%. The board kept that target after you became CEO." Natalie knew the number. Victor had used it in almost every board presentation for 3 years. Lena continued. "If Harbor Point missed the quarter, Victor would miss his target for the 2nd year in a row." Jack looked at the email again. "So he promised something he had no authority to promise." "Yes." Legal resisted. "Yes." He removed the language himself. Lena nodded, and when I noticed Jack asking about it, Victor told me to keep him away from every major deal. Natalie's eyes fixed on her. "You knew." Lena looked down. "I knew enough." "Why didn't you tell me?" Lena's voice cracked. "Because he told me what would happen if I did." The conference room went still. "He said I would never work in this industry again." Natalie said nothing. Lena wiped beneath one eye. "He knew about my mortgage. He knew my mother's assisted living costs, almost $6,000 a month. He knew I was paying it." Her hands closed together. "He said companies call him before they hire senior support staff. He said all he had to do was answer honestly when they asked whether I was trustworthy." Jack watched her carefully. He made a threat sound like a reference check. Lena nodded. "That is exactly how he said it." Natalie looked at the folder, then at Lena. "I am not going to tell you staying quiet was right, I know. But I understand why you were afraid." Lena closed her eyes. "I'm still afraid." Natalie reached across the table and placed one hand over the folder. "Thank you for bringing it." Lena looked at her. "I should have done it 8 months ago, yes?" The answer surprised her. Natalie continued. "But you did it tonight." Lena breathed out slowly. Jack looked at the document again. "There is one problem." Natalie turned. Only one Victor will say the email is being taken out of context. It is not. That will not stop him. Natalie knew he was right. Jack continued. He will say the clause changed as part of negotiation. He will say his incentive was ordinary executive compensation. He will say Lena misunderstood him. Lena's face fell. Jack looked at her. I am not saying he is right. I know. I am saying he has been in that boardroom for 11 years. Natalie's expression hardened. He sat beside my father. Yes, he knows every director. Yes, he knows exactly which ones still think I inherited this job. Jack did not answer. He did not need to. Natalie looked down at Victor's email. For years, she had been careful around him. Careful because he knew the clients. Careful because he knew the board. Careful because half the company considered him institutional memory and considered her a daughter with an impressive title. Natalie closed the folder. Lena asked, "What are you going to do?" Natalie looked at her, then at Jack. "Stop being careful." Jack leaned back. "That sounds expensive. It probably will be." She gathered the documents. Board meeting Monday morning. Lena's eyes widened. All of them? All of them. Does Victor know? No. Jack looked at Natalie. He will, eventually. She stood. Lena did not. What do I do until then? Natalie looked at her. You come to work, and if Victor asks me questions, tell him the truth. Lena swallowed. Which truth? Natalie opened the door. That you had dinner plans Thursday night and stayed late because your CEO has terrible boundaries. Jack looked offended. That is my line. For the first time that evening, Lena almost smiled. Natalie left with the folder. Jack remained behind. Lena looked at him. I'm sorry. For what? For not saying anything when he fired you. Jack leaned against the table. You were scared. That does not make it right. No. She looked surprised by the blunt answer. Jack continued. But being afraid and being cruel are not the same thing. Lena looked down. Emma ever gets scared all the time. What do you tell her? Jack thought about it. Usually that courage is just doing the next thing while your stomach feels terrible. Lena gave a weak laugh. My stomach feels terrible. Then you are apparently making progress. She picked up her bag. At the doorway, she stopped. Jack. Yeah, why did you come back? Jack looked through the glass wall toward Natalie's office. She stood alone inside reading Victor's email again. I'm still figuring that out. Lena left. Jack remained in the conference room. His phone showed 5:47. He had missed dinner. He stared at the time, then immediately called Emma. She answered on the second ring. You're late. I know, you said 6, I know. A pause. Is the building on fire? Jack smiled. No. Then this is a violation. Correct. Do I get damages? He laughed. What kind? Chocolate ice cream? Extortion? Negotiation? Jack looked through the glass at Natalie. She had heard enough to smile. Fine, Jack said. Chocolate ice cream. 6:30. I'll be there. You promise? Jack looked at the folder in Natalie's hands, at all the reasons he could stay, then at the clock. Promise. He hung up. Natalie stepped into the conference room. You should go. Jack collected his jacket. You are staying. Yes. That seems hypocritical. I do not have a science fair. No. Jack paused beside her. You also do not have to do this alone. Natalie looked at him. For 1 second, the office disappeared. No CEO, no advisor, no $50 million agreement between them. Just two tired people standing too close in an empty conference room. Natalie's voice softened. I know. Jack nodded, then left. Natalie watched him walk toward the elevator. At 6:34, Jack Mercer opened his front door carrying chocolate ice cream. Emma stood in the hallway with her arms folded. 4 minutes late. Chicago traffic. Excuse rejected. Jack held up the container. She took it. Penalty accepted. She turned toward the kitchen. Jack followed. On the refrigerator, her drawing of Dad's new job was now attached with 2 magnets. The building had crooked windows. The stick figure Jack had ridiculously long arms. The small house sat only a few inches away. Jack looked at it longer than usual. Emma opened the freezer. Dad. Yeah. Do you like the new job? Jack took off his coat. He thought about the question, about the deal room, about Victor, about the fear in Lena's face. About Natalie standing in his doorway in Oak Park because sending an apology through human resources had felt too easy. Some of it. Emma nodded. That's probably enough. Jack smiled. Probably. He helped her scoop ice cream into 2 bowls. Downtown Natalie sat alone at the head of the same conference table where the $50 million agreement had landed Monday morning. Victor's email lay in front of her. Beside it were Jack's access records, Lena's statement, the compensation schedule, the deleted clause. Natalie opened her laptop. She created a new meeting invitation. Board of Directors Monday, 8 a.m. mandatory attendance. She read it once, then pressed send. Monday arrived clear and cold. At 7:30 in the morning, the executive floor was already awake. Assistants moved quickly between offices. Coffee machines ran without stopping. Conference room lights burned across the glass walls. Everyone knew the board had been called in early. Almost nobody knew why. Jack arrived at 7:42. He wore a dark suit he had not touched in years. Emma had stood in the hallway that morning and stared at him for almost 10 seconds. "You look weird." Jack had adjusted his cuff. "Good weird like a lawyer. That is not good weird." She had smiled. Then she pointed at his tie. "It is crooked." Jack looked down. "You could have told me before I put the jacket on." Emma stepped forward and fixed it for him. Her fingers were small and serious. "You have an important meeting." "Yes." "Are you scared?" Jack looked at her. Children had a way of asking questions adults spent whole careers avoiding. "A little." Emma nodded. "That means you should eat breakfast." Jack smiled. "Where did you hear that you tell me that before tests?" "That is different." "No." Jack had no argument. So he ate half a piece of toast. Now, standing outside the boardroom, he thought about that conversation. Through the glass, he could see Natalie at the head of the table. She was already seated. A folder sat in front of every chair. Lena stood near the wall with a laptop. Her hands looked steady. Jack knew better. Victor had not arrived yet. Natalie looked up when Jack entered. For 1 second, the room became quieter. "You came. You invited me. I wasn't sure you would wear a tie." Jack sat 2 seats from her. Emma insisted. Natalie looked at it. "She did a good job. She has strong opinions. I noticed." The small smile between them disappeared as the first directors entered. Margaret Sloan arrived first. 68, silver hair, a sharp voice. She had served on the board since before Natalie graduated from business school. 2 directors followed her, then another. By 7:58, every chair was occupied except one, Victor's. Margaret looked toward the clock. "Is this about Harbor Point?" Natalie closed the folder in front of her. "Yes." "Then why is the special advisor here?" Before Natalie could answer, the boardroom door opened. Victor entered, not alone. A lawyer walked beside him. Victor wore a navy suit and the expression of a man arriving at a meeting he believed he already understood. His eyes moved to Jack, then to Lena, then to the folders. He smiled. "Good morning." Natalie did not return it. "You brought counsel. I received a mandatory board notice without explanation." Victor took his seat. "I thought preparation was reasonable." His attorney sat behind him. Margaret looked toward Natalie. "This seems more serious than a deal update." "It is." Natalie stood. She did not use a presentation, no polished slides, no company branding. She placed a single Harbor Point document on the screen. 8 months ago, Bennett Rowe's original acquisition draft contained specific buyer protection for cyber incidents that occurred before closing, but were discovered after closing. Victor leaned back. Natalie continued. On March 12th at 11:12 at night, that protection was removed. The screen changed. Edit history. Victor's initials. His counsel leaned closer. Natalie did not look at them. 2 weeks later, legal operations employee Rachel Kim raised a version concern. Another document appeared. Rachel was removed from Harbor Point support. She clicked again. 1 month later, compliance analyst Peter Collins questioned a mismatch in the data room. Another page. He was reassigned. Victor shifted slightly. Natalie continued. 3 months later, Jack Mercer noticed the same problem. The room turned toward Jack. Natalie's voice stayed calm. He was blocked from executive transaction support. Another record appeared, and 2 days after he asked Victor Hale directly why the language had been removed, Jack was terminated. Victor finally spoke. Are we pretending ordinary staffing decisions are evidence of misconduct? Natalie looked at him. I am describing the timeline. You are implying a conclusion. Not yet. She placed the compensation schedule on the screen. Victor stopped moving. Natalie said your executive bonus increased substantially if Harbor Point closed before quarter end. Margaret adjusted her glasses. That incentive was approved by compensation committee. Yes, Victor said immediately. Natalie nodded. It was. Victor looked around the table. So there is nothing improper about it. Natalie changed the screen. The email appeared. Victor to Harbor Point's chief executive. Private. No legal team copied. No Natalie. No board. The room went still. Natalie read only the relevant line. You promised Harbor Point that Bennett and Rowe would soften liability protection if they kept the closing schedule. Victor's jaw tightened. This is negotiation context. You did not have authority to make that commitment. I had authority to advance the transaction. You had authority to negotiate within approved parameters. Victor leaned forward, and I did. Jack watched him. Victor never looked at the screen for long. He looked at people. He was already reading the room, already identifying which directors were uncomfortable, which ones might still believe him. Margaret asked, why was legal not copied? Victor answered immediately. Because it was a preliminary conversation. Then why did the clause change that night? Victor turned toward Natalie. You are building a disciplinary theory out of ordinary deal pressure because you are embarrassed that this transaction almost failed. Natalie's expression did not move. Victor continued. You hired a terminated employee to investigate his own termination. There it was. Jack had expected it. Victor's lawyer opened another folder. Victor looked around the table. Has Natalie told you that Jack Mercer removed confidential Harbor Point documents from the building after he was dismissed? The directors turned toward Jack again. Natalie's eyes went to him. Jack remained still. Victor saw the reaction and pressed harder. He printed transaction material without authorization. He took it home. He then sent a proposed counterstructure after his system access had been terminated. One director frowned. Is that true? Jack answered. Yes. The room changed. Victor smiled. Natalie did not interrupt. Jack continued. I printed the original term sheet, the version logs, and the page showing the deleted clause. You admit taking company documents, Victor said. Yes. After termination, yes. Victor looked toward the board. And we are treating this man as a credible investigator. Jack folded his hands. Victor leaned toward him. Why did you take them? Because I believed the electronic record could change. Victor laughed. Convenient, it was. Victor's smile disappeared. Jack continued. I violated document policy. Natalie looked at him. He had promised her he would not hide from the bad facts, so he did not. I should not have taken the folder. Victor turned toward Margaret. There, we are done. Jack looked at him. No. Victor paused. Jack said, the documents I took are not the evidence you are looking at today. The room went quiet again. Victor's face changed slightly. Jack continued. Before this meeting, Bennett and Rowe's general counsel issued a preservation request to the company's independent server archive. The general counsel nodded. Jack looked toward the screen. The version history displayed here came directly from that archive. Victor's attorney stood slightly. We have not validated chain of custody. The general counsel answered. My office has. Victor looked at him. The general counsel continued. We retained an external forensic firm Friday night. Natalie had not told Victor. That was obvious now. The screen changed. System access. Timestamps. Device identity. Jack spoke. The edit that removed buyer protection was made from Victor Hale's assigned laptop. Victor's lawyer said credentials can be compromised. Jack nodded. They can. Another record appeared. Which is why we checked building access. Badge log. Victor Hale. Executive floor entry. 11-1. Jack looked at the directors. 11 minutes before the edit. Another record. Secure network connection. Victor's laptop. 11-9 edit. 11-12. Jack said security video also places Mr. Hale on this floor during that window. Victor's lawyer spoke. None of this proves improper intent. Jack looked at Victor. No. He turned the page. It proves the edit was deliberate. Victor's voice sharpened. I never said it was accidental. Jack nodded. Good. That answer landed badly for Victor. Margaret leaned forward. Then why remove the protection? Victor looked at her. To keep a difficult acquisition moving. At the company's risk, at a manageable risk. Jack finally spoke directly to him. You never modeled it. Victor turned. You have no idea what I modeled. There is no risk memorandum. Not every executive judgment requires one. There is no email to legal. Victor said nothing. No board authorization. Silence. No approval from Natalie. Victor's face hardened. You worked in IT? Jack looked at him. For 6 years. Victor laughed once. A basement technician is now lecturing this board on acquisition authority. Jack did not raise his voice. I spent 6 years fixing systems nobody noticed until they stopped working. He looked down at the agreement. This one is not that different. Victor pushed back from the table. You think because you worked at Sterling Wynn a decade ago you can walk back into a boardroom and pretend nothing changed? Several directors looked at Jack. Victor had changed strategy again. Jack recognized it immediately. If the evidence could not be attacked, attack the witness, Victor continued. You disappeared. Jack stayed quiet. You removed your history from your resume. Yes, you concealed material professional experience. Yes, you entered a company under a false picture of who you were. Jack looked at him. I entered as an IT employee because I wanted to be an IT employee. Victor smiled. You want this board to believe one of the most aggressive deal strategists in New York simply decided to reset passwords? Yes. Why Jack did not answer immediately. He looked at Natalie, then at the directors. My wife died. The room became still. Victor looked irritated by the direction of the answer. Jack continued. I was in Boston when it happened. His voice remained even. I had ignored her calls because I was closing a transaction. Natalie looked at him. She had heard pieces of this in her office, not like this. Jack said my daughter was 2. A pause. I left finance because I knew exactly what the job gave me and I finally understood what it had taken. Victor spoke quickly. This is emotional theater. Margaret turned toward him. No, Preston. Victor looked at her. She corrected herself. Victor. The mistake told the room how far back her habits with powerful men went. She continued. Let him finish. Jack looked down for one moment, then back up. I did not come here to reclaim a career. He looked at Victor, and I did not return because I wanted revenge. Then why are you here? Victor asked. Jack answered simply, because you fired me to make a problem disappear. Victor stood. You cannot prove that. The boardroom door opened. Everyone turned. Lena Ortiz stepped away from the wall. Natalie had told her she could leave before this moment. She had stayed. Lena walked toward the table. Victor watched her. Something in his face sharpened. Lena. She stopped. That single word carried years of authority. Jack saw her hands tremble. Victor softened his voice. You should be very careful. Natalie rose. Lena looked at her. Natalie said nothing. No rescue, no speech, no instruction. The choice belonged to Lena. Lena looked back at Victor. You told me Jack had to be removed. Victor's attorney stood. My client will not respond to unsupported allegations. Lena continued. 8 months ago you told me he could never be assigned to another major deal room. Victor said that was a management decision. You told me he saw too much. I do not remember that. I do. Victor's eyes narrowed. Lena's voice shook. You told me if I ever showed Natalie the original Harbor Point drafts, I would never work in this industry again. Victor leaned forward. That is false. Lena took a breath. You said every senior executive recruiter in Chicago knew your number. Victor said nothing. You said all you had to do was answer one question about whether I was trustworthy. Her voice almost failed. She stopped. Jack watched her. Lena closed her eyes for a second, then opened them. You knew my mother was in assisted living. Victor's expression changed. You knew I was paying for it. Margaret looked toward him. Lena continued. You knew exactly what losing my career would mean. Victor stood. She is lying because she knows she helped conceal information. Lena looked at him. Yes. The admission surprised everyone. Victor hesitated. Lena's voice became steadier. I stayed quiet. She looked around the room. I was afraid. Then back at Victor. I am still afraid. Victor stared at her. Lena swallowed. But at least now I am afraid while telling the truth. The silence afterward was heavier than anything Natalie could have created with argument. Victor looked around the table. For the first time, he did not see automatic allies. He saw calculation. People reconsidering old conversations, old decisions, old deference. Victor turned toward Natalie. So this is your leadership now? Natalie met his eyes. Evidence. A disgruntled employee. A frightened assistant. An advisor with a personal grievance. You removed the clause. Yes, you hid the commitment from the board. I exercised judgment. You threatened Lena. I deny that. You fired Jack. He was insubordinate. Natalie's voice became colder. He was right. Victor's face tightened. He looked around the table. Her father would never have allowed this. Natalie went still. Jack saw the hit land. Victor did too. He moved toward it. Your father understood loyalty. Natalie did not answer. He understood that leadership means trusting the people who built the company. Victor pointed toward Jack. Not bringing in some vanished Wall Street negotiator because he makes you feel decisive. Jack's jaw tightened. Natalie remained still. Victor continued. I built half your client list. No one interrupted. I sat beside your father when this company had 1 floor and 40 employees. Natalie's hand rested on the table. Victor's voice rose. You inherited the office. A pause. You did not inherit his judgment. The room froze. Jack looked at Natalie. Her face had gone pale, but her voice when it came was quiet. My father trusted you. Victor almost smiled. Yes. Natalie nodded. That was his mistake. Victor's smile vanished. Natalie continued. And keeping you this long was mine. She closed the folder. I move that Victor Hale be suspended from all executive duties effective immediately pending a fully independent audit of every transaction that passed through his authority over the last 5 years. Victor stared at her. Margaret spoke first. I second. Victor looked toward her. Margaret. She did not look back. Natalie called the vote. One hand rose, then another, then another. Victor watched them. Men and women who had spent years nodding when he spoke now lifted their hands without meeting his eyes. The motion passed. Not unanimously, but not close. Victor stood so quickly his chair struck the wall. You have no idea what you are doing. Natalie remained seated. Security is waiting outside. Victor looked at Jack. This is what you wanted. Jack shook his head. No, you think they respect you. Now Jack said nothing. They respect what you can do for them. Jack looked toward the windows, then back at Victor. Maybe. Victor waited. Jack added, but my daughter cares whether I come home the same man I was when I left. Victor stared at him. For once there was no answer waiting. Security entered. Victor gathered his papers. At the door he turned toward Natalie. You will regret choosing him. Natalie stood. I did not choose him. Victor paused. I chose the evidence. Security walked him out. Nobody spoke until the doors closed. One by one, the directors left. Margaret paused beside Natalie. You should have told us sooner. Natalie looked at her. I did not know sooner. Margaret nodded. That is not the same thing. Then she left. Soon, only Natalie and Jack remained. Lena had gone to legal. The conference room looked strangely ordinary again. Folders, coffee cups, chairs slightly out of place. Natalie stood by the window. Jack noticed her hands. They were shaking. She folded them together. I almost lost the board. Jack walked closer. But you didn't. I might still lose clients, probably. She turned. That is a terrible attempt at comfort. I have been out of practice. Natalie laughed once, then looked down. I was scared. Jack stood beside her. I know. You make that sound normal. It is. She looked at him. Thank you. For what? For not telling me I was brave. Jack considered that. You were scared. Yes, you did it anyway. Natalie looked toward the empty chair Victor had left behind. Jack said that usually counts. Her hand rested on the table. His was beside it. For a moment, neither moved. Then Natalie's fingers touched his. Lightly. Almost by accident. Jack looked down. She started to pull away. He turned his hand over instead. Her fingers settled into his palm. They stayed like that in the empty boardroom, saying nothing. Outside the window, Chicago kept moving. Inside, for the first time all morning, neither of them needed to. The audit began before the week was over. Victor Hale resigned before the board could formally remove him. His attorney called it a personal decision. Nobody inside Bennett and Rowe believed that. The independent review found no single criminal conspiracy waiting beneath Harbor Point. The truth was quieter than that, and in some ways worse. Victor had spent years bending judgment toward whatever made the quarter look better. He pushed deals forward when more review was needed. He discouraged questions that threatened deadlines. He made employees understand that being useful meant not making powerful people uncomfortable. Harbor Point was simply the first time someone had preserved enough evidence to show the pattern clearly. Natalie read the final report alone in her office. Jack stood by the window. The report was more than 200 pages. She closed it. I kept thinking there would be one moment. Jack looked over. One moment, one decision where he became this person. Jack considered that. There usually isn't. Natalie looked down at the report. That almost makes it worse. He probably told himself every decision was temporary, that he was protecting the company, or protecting the quarter, then protecting his reputation, then protecting the last thing he did to protect the thing before that. Natalie looked at him. You sound like you have thought about this. Jack's eyes went toward the city. I spent 10 years thinking about how people become someone they never planned to be. Natalie understood he was no longer talking about Victor. She did not press. The company changed quickly after the audit. Not because Natalie announced a cultural transformation. She hated phrases like that. They usually appeared in presentations long before anyone changed anything real. Instead, she changed procedures. Employees could report concerns directly to an independent board committee. Retaliation complaints required outside review. Senior executives could no longer remove people from transaction teams without documented reasons. Termination decisions involving anyone who had raised a compliance issue required a second approval outside the employee's reporting chain. Lena Ortiz was offered a new role overseeing internal escalation and governance. She stared at the offer letter for a long time. Then she walked into Natalie's office. You know what I did? Natalie looked up. Yes, I stayed quiet. Yes, I could have stopped some of this earlier. Maybe. Lena looked uncomfortable. That is not very reassuring. It is not supposed to be. Natalie folded her hands. You made a bad decision because you were afraid. Lena said nothing. Natalie continued. Now you know exactly what fear can do inside a company when nobody builds a safe place for the truth to go. Lena looked at the offer again. You trust me with that. I trust you to remember what it costs when the system fails. Lena accepted. Jack refused every attempt to give his new job a more impressive title. Senior Vice President of Strategic Transactions lasted less than one conversation. Head of Corporate Development lasted 30 seconds. Executive Managing Director lasted long enough for Jack to laugh. Eventually, Natalie stopped trying. The internal directory simply read, Jack Mercer, Special Advisor to the CEO Transaction Strategy. Jack approved. Emma did too. It fits on one line, she said. Apparently that mattered. The New York calls did not stop. Ben Carver called twice, then 3 times. Then sent an offer that would have changed Jack's financial life. Partnership, equity, control over his own team. A salary large enough to make the mortgage irrelevant. Jack printed the letter. He left it on the kitchen table overnight. The next morning, Emma sat beside it eating cereal. She pointed at the number. Is that money? Yes, that is a lot. Yes, would we be rich? Jack poured coffee. We are doing fine. That means yes. Jack smiled. Emma looked at the letter again. Is the job here? New York? Yes. She ate another spoonful. Would I have to move maybe? Would you travel probably? Emma considered this. Then she shrugged. You should do what you want. Jack looked at her. That is very mature, I know. Then she added, but Thursday is parent night. Jack laughed. There it was, the clause that mattered. Later that morning he called Ben. You are turning me down again, Ben said before Jack could speak. Yes, you did not even negotiate. I am evolving. You are wasting a gift. Jack leaned against his office window. No. Ben went quiet. Jack continued. I spent years thinking I only had 2 choices. What choices? Be great at the work and lose everything around it, or walk away from the work completely? He looked toward the drawing Emma had made. The tall building, the little house, the line between them. I was wrong. Ben sighed. They are not paying you enough. They pay me fine. You could make 3 times as much. I know. And you are still staying. Yes, because of your daughter. Jack thought about Natalie. About Harbor Point. About leaving the office at 5:30. About being listened to without being consumed. Because of the life. Ben understood. Call me when you get bored. I won't. You always say that. Jack hung up smiling. That Friday, Natalie arrived at his house carrying Chinese food. Jack opened the door. She held up the bags. I was told orange chicken has strategic importance. Emma shouted from the living room. It does. Jack looked at Natalie. You could have sent someone. I know. You have assistants, I know. Several. Natalie stepped past him. I wanted to come. Jack closed the door. That answer stayed with him. Emma had apparently decided Natalie was now part of the evening before anyone else had been consulted. She assigned seats. She chose the movie. She explained the house rules. No phones during the movie unless somebody is hurt. Natalie looked at Jack. You taught her that. Jack sat down. She improves regulations without approval. Emma pointed at him. And he talks during movies. I provide context. You explain things before they happen. I recognize patterns. That is called spoiling. Natalie smiled. I am with Emma. Jack looked betrayed. That was fast. Dinner lasted almost 2 hours. Emma talked about school. A boy named Tyler had brought a frog into class. Her teacher had cried. Not because she was sad, because the frog jumped into her coffee. Natalie laughed so hard she had to put down her fork. Jack watched her. At work, Natalie was controlled even when she relaxed. She listened with purpose. She smiled carefully. She carried herself like someone who knew every room was judging whether she belonged at the head of it. Here, she sat barefoot on the edge of Jack's couch because Emma had told her shoes were not allowed on the rug. Her hair had fallen loose around her face. She looked younger, less defended. For the first time, Jack wondered how exhausting it must be to spend every day proving you deserved something your father had left you. After dinner, Emma dragged Natalie toward the refrigerator. This is Dad's office. Natalie stared at the drawing. I have seen it. No, you saw the copy. Emma pointed proudly. This is the original. Jack leaned against the counter. Apparently, provenance matters. Emma pointed to the tall building. That is where Dad works. Natalie studied the crooked windows. And this is me. Emma pointed to the smaller figure beside Jack. No, that is me. Natalie smiled. Of course. Emma thought for a second, then took a marker. She drew another figure beside them. Jack straightened. Emma. What? She gave the new person dark hair. Natalie said nothing. Emma added a small square beside the figure. What is that? Jack asked. A purse. Natalie looked at him. I feel accurately represented. Emma capped the marker. There, 3 figures. 1 building, 1 house. Jack stared at the drawing. Emma ran toward the living room before either adult could say anything. Natalie remained beside him. She is subtle. Never. They both looked at the drawing. Natalie said quietly, She seems happy. She is. You did that. Jack shook his head. She did a lot of it herself. Natalie looked at him. You know what I mean. Jack did. He changed the subject. After Emma went to bed, Natalie and Jack sat on the back steps. The air had turned cool. Streetlights glowed between the trees. Someone nearby was playing music softly through an open window. Natalie held a mug of tea. Jack had coffee. You drink coffee at 10 at night? She asked. I worked in finance. I thought you retired from the bad habits. Some survive. Natalie smiled. For a while, neither spoke. The silence was comfortable now. That had happened gradually. Somewhere between version logs and takeout dinners. They had stopped needing every quiet moment to be filled. Natalie looked toward the kitchen window. I don't remember the last time I had dinner like that. Loud real. Jack looked at her. She continued. Most dinners in my life are meetings pretending not to be meetings. That sounds terrible. It is efficient. That is not a defense, I know. Jack smiled. Natalie stared into her tea. People usually want something. What do they want? Access? Money, approval, a decision. Jack leaned back against the step. I don't. Natalie looked at him. I know. A pause. That might be why I keep coming back. Jack felt the words settle between them. He could have turned it into a joke, he almost did. Instead he said, "I'm glad you do." Natalie looked down, then smiled. Small, uncertain. Nothing happened that night. That mattered too. 3 months after Victor left, Bennett and Rowe held the final signing ceremony for Harbor Point. The acquisition had changed during the review. Jack had restructured the operating agreement so both companies could build a longer partnership instead of fighting over control during the first year. The original $50 million transaction remained intact. The protection did too. No hidden exposure, no secret promises, no executive bonus driving the language. The main conference hall filled with employees, advisors, board members, and Harbor Point leaders. Jack stood near the side of the stage. Natalie found him adjusting his cuff. "You are hiding. I am standing. Near an exit. Strategic placement. You are coming on stage. No. Yes. We discussed this. You said no speech. Correct. No biography. Correct. No Sterling Wynn story. Correct." Jack looked suspicious. Natalie smiled. "Your name is allowed to exist." The humor left his face. Natalie saw it. She softened. "You spent 6 years making yourself small enough that nobody could ask anything from you." Jack looked toward the crowd. "I like small. I know. Small was safe." Natalie nodded. "Maybe. Then but safe is not the same as invisible." Jack looked at her. Before he could answer, Emma appeared beside them. She wore a blue dress and white sneakers. "Dad." Jack looked down. "You are supposed to be sitting with Lena. I had to check something. What's your name?" Jack frowned. Emma pointed toward the agreement displayed beside the stage. They walked over. The signature page had been enlarged beneath glass. Emma read slowly. "Jack Mercer, Special Advisor, Bennett and Rowe Holdings." She touched the glass. They spelled it right. Jack smiled. "Yes, all the letters, all of them." Emma nodded. "Good." Then she ran back toward Lena. Jack stayed there. For a moment he could not move. Natalie stood beside him. "You okay?" Jack looked at his name. 10 years ago he had left a world where his name carried too much weight. 6 years ago he had entered Bennett and Rowe, hoping it would carry none. Now it was simply his. Not legend, not secret, not something to hide. Just his name. "Yeah," he said. Natalie touched his arm. "Come on." They stood together at the front during the signing. Not CEO and technician. Not rescuer and rescued. Partners. When the applause came, Jack looked toward Emma. She waved both arms. He laughed. Natalie saw him. Something warm moved across her face. Later, the hallway outside the conference hall emptied. Jack found Natalie near the elevators. "You survived the stage, barely. No reporters attacked you. Yet." Natalie smiled. "You could still go back to being anonymous." Jack looked at her. "I tried that. For a long time. 6 years. Impressive commitment. Then some CEO showed up at my house late at night. She sounds intrusive. Terrible boundaries." Natalie laughed. Jack stepped closer. "I wasn't looking for any of this." Natalie's smile faded. "Neither was I. I wasn't looking for another career. I know. I definitely wasn't looking for you." Natalie raised an eyebrow. "That may be the least romantic thing anyone has ever said to me." "I am rusty." I noticed. Jack reached for her hand. This time there was no accident in it. Natalie looked down at their fingers, then back at him. "This gets complicated. I negotiate complicated things. That was arrogant. I used to be famous for it." She laughed softly. Jack became serious. "If this ever makes Emma's life unstable, I stop." Natalie shook her head. "If this ever makes Emma's life unstable, we slow down." Jack caught the word. Natalie realized what she had said. She did not take it back. We. Jack looked at her for a long moment. Then he kissed her. Quietly. No audience. No dramatic music. Just two people standing in a hallway after months of learning how much truth they could trust each other with. When they separated, Emma's voice came from behind them. "I knew it." Jack closed his eyes. Natalie laughed against his shoulder. Emma stood 20 feet away with her arms folded. Jack turned. Knew what Emma pointed at Natalie. "She is your girlfriend, Emma." Well, Jack looked at Natalie. Natalie looked amused. Jack sighed. "I have negotiated hostile acquisitions that were easier than this conversation." Emma waited. Natalie answered. "Yes." Emma smiled. Okay. Then she turned and walked away. Jack stared after her. That was easier than expected. Natalie slipped her hand into his. Maybe you spent too long negotiating the wrong person. Jack laughed. They walked toward the elevators. Near the doors, Jack stopped. Through the open conference room behind them, he could still see the Harbor Point Agreement. His name sat on the final page. 3 months earlier, nobody upstairs had known who Jack Mercer was. He had walked out carrying 6 years of work in a cardboard box. Now the contract that had started everything was finished. His name was visible. His work mattered, but he no longer needed either fact to prove anything. Emma pressed the elevator button. Dad. Jack looked over. Yeah. Are you still coming home for dinner? The doors opened. Natalie looked at him. Jack looked at his daughter. Then he stepped into the elevator with both of them. Always, the doors closed.